You know, any movie that has both Beatles and Star Wars and Indiana Jones music in there is already a win for me. If These Walls Could Sing. So, If These Walls Could Sing is directed by Paul McCartney's daughter, Mary McCartney, and it's her first film. And essentially, the documentary is an insight into Abbey Road Recording Studios, and we see a wide range of interviews from people who worked in the studios, people who recorded in the studios, and what it was like to be in Abbey Road Recording Studios. And honestly, I really liked this film. I thought it was really entertaining. I thought it was really enjoyable to watch. I liked the wide range of interviews we got from people who had recorded in there. Like, there was interviews, obviously, from the last remaining Beatles. You kind of expect, Paul McCartney to be interviewed in this film because it's directed by his daughter, and Ringo Starr is also interviewed as well. But then we got interviews from people like, John Williams and George Lucas when they were recording the Star Wars movies, when they were recording Empire Strikes Back score, Return of the Jedi score, and the Star Wars prequel scores in there, and I found that all really interesting. And also, we had interviews from David Gilmour and Roger Waters, who are both quite prominent figures in Pink Floyd, and also the drummer of Pink Floyd as well. I forgot the name of the guy off the top of my head right now. But he got interviews from people in Pink Floyd, which I really liked because that gave insight into the recording of the Dark Side of the Moon album, which is an absolutely incredible album in my opinion. And then also we had interviews from people like Elton John in there, and we had interviews from people like people who were in the Hollies as well, and low range of interviews. And also the Gallagher brothers both were in there, doing interviews, and I found it really engrossing. Now, I didn't find it fascinating, I must admit. I didn't think it was as fascinating as, say, the Beatles anthology series, or, say, Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary, which came out last year on Disney+. It wasn't quite that standard, but it was still really good, though. It was really entertaining. And as a first film from Mary McCartney, I think she does a great job. I must admit, some of her voiceover narration was it felt a bit unnecessary. I don't know if it was really needed. Like, especially the end when she says that the things I've learned with this documentary is that Abbey Road Recording Studios was such a magnificent place. I didn't need to hear what she'd learned from the documentary. We kind of already got that ourselves. I thought that was a bit condescending in a sort of way, but at the same time though, I think it was actually really well done. I thought the documentary was structured well. I liked the way that she sort of conducted the interview as well. They felt quite laid back, and I liked as well how she didn't just focus on the Beatles like she could have, or she just could have just focused on the Beatles and Wings, because obviously that's her father's band. Instead, what she did was she focused on the Beatles a lot. They're the primary focus. Obviously, Abbey Road Recording Studios and everything like that. That's where they recorded almost all their albums, as far as I remember. I must admit, I'm a huge Beatles fan, if you didn't know already. I've mentioned this in the channel before. I love the Beatles. I've got an Abbey Road poster back there. Don't know how well you can see that. Hopefully you can see it in the background. Also, I've got loads of Beatles memorabilia back behind me. But yes, I'm a huge Beatles fan. But at the same time, though, I'm kind of glad that they didn't just focus on the Beatles, because I didn't know a lot of the stuff in this documentary before. Like, I didn't know that Elton John recorded in Abbey Road Studios. I didn't know that the Gallagher brothers had, and I didn't know what Oasis had, and I didn't know that The Dark Side of the Moon was recorded in Abbey Road Studios either. I knew that John Williams had recorded scores there, but I didn't know which scores recorded. Actually, that's a bit of a lie. I knew he recorded the Phantom Menace score there, but I didn't know he recorded other Star Wars scores there as well. So again, that was all really interesting. It just wasn't quite as fascinating as the Beatles anthology, and it didn't go into quite as much detail on the recording of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, which is fine, because the Beatles anthology series already does that, and it does it in such great detail. Honestly, if you're a fan of the Beatles, or if you're interested in the Beatles story in any sort of way, check out the Beatles anthology, because that is a series I remember watching over the span of about a week when I was about 15, maybe younger, and I was just so enthralled by it, and it's magnificent. It had a really fascinating segment all about the recording of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. So if you didn't feel like you got much insight from the recording of that album in this documentary, go and check out the Beatles anthology. And so that was also why I was kind of fine with the fact that it didn't go into too much detail, because other documentaries have. I mean, I probably would have liked this documentary to go into more detail on the recording of Oasis, their time in Abbey Road Studios, because it does talk about it, but it only goes on for about 5 minutes about their experience recording in the studio. And I wanted them to do a bit more there, because they even talk about it in the documentary. Oasis are huge Beatles fans. Like, they wouldn't exist without the Beatles. They really wouldn't. I've been listening to a couple of Oasis songs recently, and it's amazing how much their music sounds similar to the Beatles. In fact, they copy a couple of rhythms every now and then. I forgot what song it is. Yeah, She's Electric copies a bit off, I think it's With a Lot of Help from My Friends. But anyway, yeah, that's neither here or there. But I just would have liked to see a bit more detail onto the Oasis recording in there. Same with John Williams recording in there. Because, like I said before, I knew John Williams had recorded in Abbey Road Studios before. I didn't know to the extent. And maybe it's not that interesting. Maybe they just went in there, recorded, and that was pretty much it. But I would have liked to see a bit more about John Williams' time in Abbey Road Studios, because again they covered it, but not in great detail. But at the same time, though, I still found the documentary entertaining, and I still found it insightful. I learned a lot about Abbey Road Recording Studios, more than I knew beforehand. Like, I also learned about the fact that Jimmy Page, who was, I think, the lead guitarist in Led Zeppelin, must admit I'm not the biggest fan of Led Zeppelin, although they got some absolute bangers, like the Rain song, Immigrant Song, Heartbreak, and so on and so on and so on. I'm not the biggest fan of Led Zeppelin, though. But yeah, Jimmy Page, who I think is the lead guitarist of Led Zeppelin, actually played on the Goldfinger soundtrack, and he was talking about his time when he watched Shirley Bassey performing the Goldfinger song, and I really liked that. And also, I liked how we had kind of stock sort of interviews, that were played in sort of like voiceover narration over the documentary from people like George Martin, who have sadly passed away now, but who was a producer on all the Beatles songs, apart from Let It Be, as far as I remember. But yeah, I loved how we had like interviews from people who were sadly no longer with us, but they were still using this documentary. There was an old interview that was used from George Harrison, an old interview that was used from Shirley Bassey, an old interview which was used from George Martin, like I already mentioned. Then you had George Martin's son in there, who was talking a lot about the recording in Abbey Road Studios as well. And George Martin's son, by the way, does a great impression of his dad. But yeah, I really liked all that sort of stuff. And also, I think the documentary does a good job of giving a feel of what it is like in Abbey Road Studios. Mary McCartney captures a lot of the sort of recording studios and the way it feels, the way it looks, in a really good way. You really feel the atmosphere of Abbey Road Studios just from this documentary. And like I said before, I liked the wide range of interviews, which you wouldn't have got if this documentary wasn't from Paul McCartney's daughter, So that's one of the big advantages of her directing this documentary. Even so, I don't think her direction is amazing, and I didn't really like her voiceover narration. I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting in the beginning when she said that she had literally grown up in Abbey Road Studios, but I didn't really find the rest of her voiceover narration particularly that interesting. But at the same time, though, if it wasn't her, directing the documentary, we probably wouldn't have that wide range of interviews that we do in this film, from people in Pink Floyd to Jimmy Page to Elton John to people in the Hollies to, Ringo Starr, John Williams and George Lucas and so on and so on and so on. There's a great range of interviews in there, which I think only happened because this film was directed by Mary McCartney, and also we had a great range of music in there from the Beatles and from Oasis and from Pink Floyd and from John Williams, which again I don't think would have happened if it was anyone else making this documentary. So yeah, I do think she did a good job, and I thought she brought a lot to it, perhaps unintentionally, because if Mary McCartney rings you up and says, I'm making a documentary about Abbey Road Recording Studios, where you're coming in and doing an interview, you're not going to really say no to Paul McCartney's daughter, are you? I'd be a bit surprised if you did. Is there anything else I forgot to mention? Oh, the credits as well. That's the other thing I forgot to mention. I absolutely love the end credits, because in the end credits they sort of pull back the curtain on the interviews that McCartney did for this film, and you see Paul McCartney FaceTime Elton John, which was quite delightful, and also you see Paul McCartney walking along Abbey Road, you know, the zebra crossing just outside Abbey Road Studios, hence why the Abbey Road album is called Abbey Road. That's why the Beatles' final album is called Abbey Road. But you see Paul McCartney, I think a year ago or something, walking along that zebra crossing, and he almost gets run over by a car, which is quite funny. And also, a little moment for me was when you saw Ringo Starr meet with John Williams in the credits as well, and McCartney asks John Williams, "Were you ever a fan of the Beatles' music?" And he goes, "Oh yeah," and then Ringo Starr just comes up in the background and gives him a huge hug, and that was quite a moment because, you know, I'm a huge Beatles fan, I've already mentioned in this video, and if you haven't guessed already, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm a huge fan of the Star Wars music in particular, and I'm a huge John Williams fan. He's probably he is definitely my favourite film composer ever. He's magnificent in my opinion. I can't wait to hear his new score for Indiana Jones 5, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, coming later this year. And I think his scores for Indiana Jones and Star Wars, which they cover in this documentary, are just magnificent. I think he's the best film composer, period. And seeing John Williams and Ringo Starr there was like, wow. That's something I never thought I'd ever see. I mean, there might be images on Google of like John Williams with Paul McCartney. I don't know. I haven't actually looked. But seeing that in the documentary, just seeing it just felt more real and authentic, just seeing them come together. I don't know, it was just a little moment for me. It's only a little tiny moment in the credits of this documentary, but, you know, I just wanted to mention it nonetheless. Overall, this film is good, it's entertaining. If you're interested in the Beatles and if you're interested in Abbey Road Studios in any sort of way, I would recommend this. It's only an hour and a half, it's not a long documentary, it's not on the same length as, you know, the Beatles Get Back documentary, which was about 6 hours in total. That was very long, and I mean, I loved that documentary, but that was really, really long. I mean, it's Peter Jackson, what do you expect? He did the Hobbit films, he did the Lord of the Rings films, and he did that 3-hour King Kong movie. He is a director who loves long films, and so, yeah, you kind of expect that from Get Back, but it's not as long as Get Back. It's only an hour and a half, and it could have gone into more detail. Sure, it could have. Maybe that's one of my criticisms. It could have gone into more detail. To be honest, I wish it had gone into more detail on the whole John Williams aspect of it, the whole Oasis aspect of it, maybe even a bit more detail on the whole Pink Floyd aspect of it. But I dare say all that is covered in other documentaries. I mean, there's an Oasis documentary, I already mentioned that, but Supersonic, which I really liked actually. I remember watching that a couple of years back. I even reviewed it on this channel, I remember, back when I started doing film reviews on my phone. Now I'm using a proper camera. That's how time flies, but still nonetheless, you know, that's probably all covered in other documentaries. So it didn't hugely bother me because I've seen those other documentaries, like when they don't go into great detail on the recording of the White Album or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It didn't really bother me that much because I've seen them go into detail. I've seen other documentaries go into detail on the recording of those albums in the stuff like the Beatles Anthology and stuff like that. So yeah, didn't really bother me. And yeah, it could have gone into more detail, but I was fine with the amount of detail it went into. It was entertaining. It was good. It's by no means groundbreaking. It's not brilliant, but I liked it, and it's sort of in the same vein as, it's also in the same family as, you know, the Beatles Get Back documentary, which came out last year, as well as Ron Howard's documentary, The Beatles, the touring years 1962 to 1965. Yeah, 1962 to 1965. It's in the same sort of family as those documentaries, just not as good. But it's good for what it is. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that if these wars could sing, I'm going to say that it's about 7.5 out of 10. One thing I haven't mentioned, actually, is this documentary might have worked better episodically. I don't even know if that's a word, but it feels a bit episodic, and it might work better as a TV series. Now, I don't know if Mary McCartney would want to do a TV series of this in any sort of way, but it feels like if it was a TV series, we could have got like an episode of the Beatles, an episode of Oasis, an episode of Pink Floyd, an episode on the Hollies, an episode of them doing the Bond soundtracks in there with John Barry, because they do mention John Barry in this documentary. An episode of Kate Bush, because he briefly mentioned her at one point. An episode with Wings as well, because they touch on the fact that Wings recorded in Abbey Road Studios, but they don't go into great detail on them. By the way, I've been listening to a lot of Wings recently. That was Paul McCartney's band after the Beatles, if people didn't know. Wings have some great songs, like some great songs. And they didn't really go into detail on Wings as well. And so it could have been better as a TV series. It could have been better as like a sort of 3-part, 4-part, maybe even 5-part TV series. Like that TV series came out all about, what was it, IGM Studios or something like that. The studio that was behind the visual effects on many of the Star Wars movies and on many Steven Spielberg films, on many George Lucas productions. I forgot what that documentary's called now, but I started watching it and I never got around to finishing it. Maybe I will. Actually, that's my plan for this next week. I'm gonna finish that documentary. None of that's useful to you guys whatsoever, but yeah, it could have been done in a similar sort of way to that. Hopefully you know which documentary I'm talking about. That documentary is also on Disney Plus, all about the team ILM Studios, I think that's what it is. Light and Magic, that's what the documentary was called, Light and Magic. It could have been done like that, and I think if it was done like that, it might have been better. But I liked it for what it is. That's why I gave it 7.5 out of 10, because I give films that sort of rating, but like a 7 out of 10 or a 7.5 out of 10, if they're good, if they're entertaining, if they're enjoyable, and if they, do what they say on the tin. But at the same time, though, if they're not groundbreaking or if they're not brilliant, then I'm not going to give it an 8 out of 10 or above. And this documentary, it didn't blow me away. It didn't really... Okay, it did teach me things I didn't already know about the Beatles and about people who had, recorded in Abbey Road, but it didn't teach me loads more than I didn't already know, if you know what I mean. It was still a really good watch though, and I definitely recommend it. I've been rambling on way too much about this, but yeah, if you're interested in Abbey Road Studios in any sort of way, then watch this, because yeah, it's good. I liked it, and it did what it said on the tin. It provided insight into the people who had recorded at Abbey Road Studios, and for that reason, I enjoyed it. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that if these walls could sing, I'm going to say that it's a 7.5 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, what do you think of If These Walls Could Sing? Please let me know your thoughts on the documentary in the comment section below. And one thing I forgot to mention, by the way, is if you are interested in watching the documentary, it is on Disney Plus, so you can go and check it out on there. Anyway guys, thank you as always for watching, and if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this video, and look forward to seeing many more, both film and TV reviews and podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. See you guys again soon, but bye for now. Bye!